Does your organisation have passion? Well, here to tell you all about that and other things, welcome Peter Langford, Doctor.
Am I on? All right, we'll see if this works a little bit better than it did for Rosemary. I've got a stiffer collar. All right, there's been a general discussion about voices within the conference so far. What I'm going to talk about essentially is voice of employees, and what that tells us, based on quite a large chunk of data that we've collected at Macquarie University, what that tells us about potential drivers of employee engagements. And I think there's good news and there's bad news when it comes to corporate social responsibility. So let me go through those. And I know I've got some fairly tight time frames, so keep me to that. I'll try to track that fairly closely. Voice Project, who are we? We specialise in organisational surveys and the diagnosis of culture and leadership, and Rob's already introduced that. We're a strange beast. We're a research and consulting company, but we are on campus at Macquarie University. What I'm going to talk about today is a model that is based on an ongoing research project. So far it's involved more than 16,000 employees representing over 1,000 organisations. We go in and basically grab little samples of business units and the like from lots and lots of different types of organisations. The model broadly is some major factors, major drivers of both performance and employee engagement within organisations. And the interesting part about the data is that we're continuing to replicate it across different sectors, across private and public and not-for-profit, across different age groups and the like as well. So it seems to be a fairly robust model. The way I'm going to deliver it is quite interactive, so I expect some voting going along here. We should all be fairly familiar with voting, with the excitement of reality TV programs. Well, here's a reality conference presentation. Here's a model. Now, many of you won't be able to read the lower levels of the categories in there at the back, and that's fine. You can get by, so long as, I hope, you can perhaps read the higher level categories here. What this model represents, and soon I'm going to put arrows on this model, what this model represents basically is the clustering of questions within our standard research survey that we use. 102 agree-disagree questions. We go and ask lots and lots of employees about these things. Whack them into a big stats package, and at the lower level, they cluster into these lower level categories here. And then at the higher level, we end up with these 7 broad boxes. And I'm going to talk about those boxes. But what we're looking at essentially, we have, this is in a sense the way people or the systems within an organisation, at least in terms of how people think about an organisation functioning. We have a system here around purpose, essentially a belief in why the organisation's there, what it's doing, how it's doing it. We have a system around managing the property, the resources, the facilities, the tangible aspects of an organisation. There's a system here involved that we call participation. Think broadly participation, not in its narrow sense, but this sense of people being involved, recognised and growing in an organisation. A system here around the quality of your co-workers. Are they motivated, talented? Do you get on well with them? System around peace, the level of wellness or a sense, the absence of stress, and the level of work-life balance. And a couple of other outcome measures over here, so passion or engagements, if you go along with the popular term at the moment, and also progress. Is the organisation achieving objectives and are customers satisfied, and is change working? The two that are probably most relevant to corporate social responsibility are purpose, this broad sense of where is this organisation, and indeed what's captured in here, if you can read the lower level issues, are belief in the mission and values and ethics and diversity. So a broad sense of why this organisation is here and what it's delivering. The other one that's probably relevant is this sense of peace, the wellness, the lack of stress, the work-life balance within the organisation. I have good news and bad news about those two things in terms of how they drive outcomes of passion and progress. Here's the interactive part. If you were allowed to vote for, I'm going to use progress as an outcome, so delivering on your objectives, achieving change and so on. If you're allowed to vote for any of these 6 other major categories as major drivers of progress in an organisation, what would they be? You can vote for 3, all right? Vote for 3 of these. Who is voting for purpose as a major driver of progress within an organisation? Okay, we've got quite a lot of takers for that one. Who is voting for property? So resources, facilities, technology and so on is a major driver of progress in an organisation. One lone hand, two lone hands, all right? You're very brave, I'm impressed. Who's voting for participation, this broad sense of people being involved, recognised and growing? All right, that's probably number 2 at the moment. Who's voting for people? That is how well you get along with your co-workers, the level of talent, motivation and so on. Okay, that's scoring pretty well. Who's voting for peace, level of wellness, work-life balance, contributing to progress in an organisation? A few lone brave hands coming up there. Francis is voting here as well. And finally, the level of passion within an organisation. Okay, so the big ones probably were certainly participation, passion, and maybe purpose. Let's see what the stats say. Now, the stats cheat because they come up with 4, but basically if you throw in all those 6 categories in terms of the predictors of progress, we get certainly this sense of direction, where the organisation's going and people's belief in that direction. Property comes up, but participation does, as most of you voted for, and also passion. So those are the biggest drivers according to this quite large database in terms of progress in an organisation. Let's say, though, we're more interested in, or if the focus is on building a passionate workforce, what are the drivers there? Who's voting purpose as a driver of passion in an organisation? Who's voting purpose? A few of you. Who's voting property, facilities, resources and so on as a major driver of passion in an organisation? A few, not too many. Participation, sense of involvement, recognition and growing. Okay, a few there. People, your perceptions of the co-workers and your experience of them. Peace. Now here's an important one for corporate social responsibility. Who's voting for peace being a driver of passion? And if we also throw in progress as a potential driver of passion, this sense of the organisation is being successful, who's choosing that one? All right, drum roll please. Let's see what the data tells us. The 3 biggest drivers of passion are purpose, participation and progress. And that's a bit of a mantra, I guess, that we're going out to organisations with now. This is what the stats are saying. This is not what what we're feeling. This is what stats based on 16,000 employees are saying. People want this sense of where's the organisation going? What's it doing here? Why is it doing it? People want this sense of being involved, recognised and growing, and they want to work for an organisation that they see as successful, delivering on its objectives, that customers are satisfied, that change is being handled well. The fascinating thing so far with these 2 outcomes is we're not getting these 2 coming up. People and peace not coming up. If I treat, though, and recently at a conference I was presenting and talking through this, and I was very much talking about these as kind of outcomes, and rightly so I was picked up, and it was a bit of an aha moment for me, that peace in many ways is an outcome as well. You can treat that as an outcome that you're trying to achieve rather than a potential driver to other outcomes. Who would vote for, in terms of, if I just limit you to these 4 here, who's voting for purpose as a major driver of peace in an organisation? So this sense of direction, why it's here and so on. Who's voting for property? That is the facilities, the resources, the technology being a driver of peace in an organisation. Not many takers for that. Who's voting for participation? Level of involvement, recognition, growth and so on. Who's voting for the quality of the people around you and you're getting on with them? Okay, a few there. And I won't go into these because given that peace isn't related to these 2, I can tell you now that those 2 aren't strongly related to peace. So the 2 major drivers of peace within an organisation, according to these stats, are property, that is the level of resources and so on, and the technology and processes that are there, and the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis are the major drivers of peace within an organisation. Now, given time, I won't go on to the next slides, but I'll stick to this one and just talk through it a little bit. The fascinating outcome from this data, and we didn't expect it at all, was in many ways the lack of the relationship between people and peace here and these 2 other outcomes. If you ask most managers out there in terms of what are the key outcomes that you want from an organisation and gave them a choice of these 3, well, they'll probably choose it in terms of this priority. At the end of the day, that's probably what they're going to choose. The whole issue of work-life balance gets a lot of coverage these days. If we were, in fact, we have broken down the data in terms of predicting passionate employees. If we look at all of these 28 other lower level categories here, so issues around direction, resources, leadership, involvement, motivation, wellness, work-life balance and so on, of all these other potential predictors of passion, work-life balance comes out as the weakest predictor of engagements and passion within all the employees, all those 16,000 employees who have taken part. And now that flies in the face of a lot of the coverage that's getting these days in the popular media, and that surprised us. We were expecting it to come up the other way. So I guess one of the outcomes for us in this process has been, and there's been a bit of media attention around this from us, is that why is work-life balance coming up as so small, or indeed why is it getting so much coverage? So I guess it's saying that work-life balance in many ways there's a strong relationship with wellness. There's a strong relationship with stress in an organisation. If you want to improve the levels of wellness in an organisation, then you look at work-life balance. The data's saying those two things are very closely related. And I think we as practitioners and the media tend to then have generalised beyond that and thought that, well, work-life balance is delivering on a whole range of other issues as well. And our data suggests that it's not delivering in terms of whether or not people are passionate at work, whether or not people are committed to the organisation, enjoying their job and going to continue working with that organisation. There's very little relationship there. In fact, in some ways, when you analyse the data, there's actually a very small negative relationship between work-life balance and the level of passion within a workforce. So, look, I might leave it because I know we're fairly short on time. I might leave my presentation at that. So I hope you found that useful. I hope it's jogged, I guess, or rattled the cage a little bit in terms of putting some of these things in perspective. As a summary, I think in terms of corporate social responsibility, I think it really highlights this sense of purpose, and that was coming through Rosemary's presentation before. It really does put a question mark and a difficulty around achieving these types of outcomes, given that they don't show a strong relationship with passion and progress in organisations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was interesting. The theme music we played this morning was bittersweet. And you could actually think about work-life balance as sort of bittersweet. I love my work, but I also love my family. And you've got this bittersweet outcome on that tension, which is interesting. I like P's as well. We run workshops, and most of our workshops have 7 P's. Participation, planning, all that sort of thing. Persuasion, which is very good. So thank you, Peter. That was thought-provoking. Please ask Peter any questions when we get to the panel session. From P1 in this session to P2, and I refer to psychologists. P2 is Siobhan McHale. And many of you probably know about Siobhan. You certainly all know about the work that ANZ have done in their breakout strategy, which has, I think, been running for 5 years or something like that. I had the pleasure of hearing Siobhan about a year ago more at the IHE, Institute of Human Excellence conference, and it's a fascinating story. Other than that, Siobhan also does Irish dancing. We could start a dance show here. Dance with me, don't dance on me, that thought. She's been in Australia since 1994. She's a citizen of this country, but she doesn't sound like one. And you will hear by the name Siobhan. Anybody here can spell Siobhan? Please see me afterwards. And then she lives in Brighton in Melbourne, that lovely place, and flew over here, Master of Science in Occupational Psychology, responsible for the strategy and design of ANZ's Cultural Transformation Program, which includes, I've heard, a breakout band, which one of the guitarists is John McFarlane, which is interesting. So this is an interesting story. Siobhan.
Thank you. I want to inflict the Irish dancing on you today. Basically, I'd like to take you through in the next 15 to 17 minutes a brief summary of the journey of Breakout, which is ANZ's Cultural Transformation Program, which has been going since 2000. And my passion is enabling people to bring their whole selves to work, enabling people to fully live their potential and to enable the human spirit to flourish in workplaces. And essentially, from my perspective, corporate social responsibility needs to start from the inside out. So there's no point doing all the stuff on the outside if you're not actually living it on the inside and treating your employees with respect and acting with integrity in your relationships with each other. So very much Breakout is about that inside-out transformation and the realization that organizations don't transform, that it's the people within the organizations that transform. So that's where we started on this journey. I won't say an awful lot about ANZ, except that we're a large organisation, one of the largest in Australia and the largest organisation in New Zealand. We've got over 30,000 employees, and we've produced another year of record profits. So in terms of our shareholders, they're very happy with us. We're also very keen to be as transparent as possible about everything that we do with our shareholders. Our customers, increasingly we've seen our customer satisfaction rates rise since we've been doing this program to the point where we're leading in terms of our customer satisfaction compared to the other major banks, and we've actually recently overtaken St. George in terms of our customer satisfaction. In terms of the community relationships, we have focused on this over the last 6 years and recently been awarded the Prime Minister's Award for our work in this area, and our people, which is where this whole journey emanates from. So I'd like to take you through some more detail around what we've been doing in that area. But things weren't always this way, and when you look back at our history, 92 was probably a low point for us. We were $2 billion in bad debt. We had a legacy of underperforming businesses. Our risk was quite high, and we needed to fundamentally change what we were doing. In fact, the bank nearly went under in 92, for those of you who remember. The CEO departed. We got a new CEO in John McFarlane, but probably the low point came for us with the cash for comment debacle. Many of you would remember that. And with the branch closures in rural Australia, which really destroyed our reputation and led to, I'm from Europe, so I couldn't quite believe it when I came here in 94 and saw the hatred with which banks, all banks are bastards. And we, deservedly so, we had that reputation. And when John McFarlane came, he started to focus on the fundamentals, the financials, and by 2000, we had become record profit producing once again. But John wasn't satisfied with that. He said, well, what else is there? We must look at other stakeholders, not just the shareholders. And we determined that we had 4 key stakeholders, obviously our shareholders, but our customers, our community, and most importantly, our people, who invest more than anybody else in the company because they invest their lifeblood, their energy, their passion, and their time. So those were the 4 stakeholders that we identified. And this realization that we wanted to be more than just a profitable bank was crucial. And at that stage in 2000, we developed our integrated strategy for culture change called Breakout, but it's actually a code word for perform, grow, and breakout. Perform is what we need to do in order to stay in business, and we make no bones about that. We have to be profitable. We have to deliver to the marketplace. The second element is the grow aspect, which is growing in a sustainable way and in a way that mitigates and reduces our risk. And the third component is about our culture and our people, and it's called Breakout, and it's about being different, being bold, and valuing our most important asset, which is our people. So that was a strategy launched in 2000, which has been going since then. And basically, at the heart of this strategy, we realized we had to articulate our values. We did quite a lot of surveys, and surveys have been a key feature of this journey. We're dealing with very numerate people and bankers, so we have to go back to them with the data. So when we surveyed our people in 2000, we discovered that we were on the 25th percentile compared to other organisations in relation to values. So we were way below average. And our people were telling us one of 2 things. Either the bank, the ANZ, has no values, or the values that we do have are negative values. So they were white-anting, backstabbing, politics, all the negatives, hierarchy, bureaucracy, that's what our people were telling us. So we realised we had to go about an exercise to glean from our people what they wanted to see in terms of the organisation we were going to become. So we articulated the values based on our 4 key stakeholders. So the customer was in there, our shareholders, our people and our community. And lastly, we articulated and summarised this in the sentence, break out, be bold and have the courage to be different. So that was really the calling to our people to unleash their energy, their passion, to bring their human side to work, because we had an overarching vision, as you can see there, to be the bank with the human face, which was really about humanising the bank. It was about putting a more caring side into the way we treated each other, which has ultimately spilled over into how the customers are treated. And that became a symbol. So today, people in the bank carry this card around with them. It's the importance of symbols, and you don't have to force it on them. They want to have this card because it stands for something. What we did was take a strategic approach to culture and a holistic approach to culture. There is no point just focusing on one aspect of culture change. In order to be successful, you've got to focus on these 3 things simultaneously. Those are the mindsets and behaviours within the organisation. So if those behaviours aren't respectful, if people aren't acting with integrity, if people are treating each other in a way which we call below the line as opposed to above the line behaviours, then you're not going to be successful in your culture change, and it has to begin from the top down. The systems, so there's no point in having great behaviours and great mindset shifts if people go back to their workplaces and go back to their desks and there's the same cruddy systems. So systems and processes need to work well for people. And finally, the symbols of change. So symbolically, what we do as managers and as leaders often gives a lot more weight to the policy. So for example, when the CEOs of the Australian banks agreed that they would not sell off any more rural branches and not close those down, the NAB announced to the market that they were going to close down 37 rural branches. At that stage, John McFarlane said, I will buy those branches. And the wave, the symbolism of that, the wave of pride that it sent through the ANZ was enormous, way beyond anything that he could have done. It didn't eventuate, but it was the symbolism of that actual act, because they didn't end up selling them, but we were prepared to buy them. In terms of the journey, what this slide I want to depict in this slide is that year on year, we look at our data and we decide what is it that we're going to do this year for our people. What is it that we're going to shift this year in terms of our mindsets and behaviours, our systems, or our symbols. And some of the key ones, which I'll just mention to you because I know you can't read the detail at the back, are the fact that back in 2001, we decided that we were going to specialise into 16 business units. We were going to give people accountability for their own P&L, for producing their own profit and loss. And that unleashed an enormous entrepreneurial spirit within the organisation. So it allowed people to say, okay, I'm accountable, I'm going to be creative, I'm going to be innovative, and people came up with amazing ideas about how they wanted to grow their business. So that was crucial. Another one that you can see there is that we introduced volunteering leave. So we said to our staff, we're serious about this, and we want to encourage you to volunteer your time. And this year, in fact, we clocked up 50,000 hours of volunteering time, with over 24% of our staff actually volunteering, which is way above the average, which I think is about 8% normally. We also embarked on an employee share plan. So currently, over 96% of our people are share owners. So again, that increases people's yearning to want to contribute to the company because they're shareholders. We also introduced PCs at home, so a subsidised PC scheme where people could actually get a PC and go home and do training, use it with their families. And these signals started to shift people's ability to see that we were serious about this. Another thing that we did at this time was introduce a workshop which we called Breakout, We started it with the top 50 in the organisation, and essentially it was a 3-day personal development workshop which covered aspects like intention. So what is your intention in the business? What is your intention in life? How do you build trusting relationships with your colleagues? So what is trust, and what is your trust bank account looking like at the moment? It covered things like communication. It covered things like what we called withhold. So withhold is something that you actually are holding on to, and there was a lot of people holding on to a lot of stuff back then, and holding on to stuff that had upset them for many years and often not sharing it with their colleagues, and that was damaging relationships. And if relationships are damaged, business can't be done. Essentially, the way business works is through personal relationships, so that was bogging us down. So we gave people tools and techniques to become more self-aware and to take decisions about their choices in life. Some people decided to leave the bank at that stage because that wasn't their choice to stay. Other people significantly shifted who they were and the way they were managing people. So much so that workshop, which was for 50 people, the CEO was so impressed with it that he said, let's roll it out to the top 1,000. So they did the workshop. Then he said, let's roll it out to the top 5,000 people. And then he basically announced to the marketplace that we were going to roll it out to everybody in ANZ. So currently, we have rolled Breakout out to 26,000 people globally. And we're still going. And we just finished the rollout to the front line with 7,000 people in our branch network doing the Breakout workshop. So quite a considerable investment. My team currently is 30 full-time people working on culture, as well as a whole range of contractors. So quite a serious investment in our culture change program. In terms of the other things that we did, we also had an initiative called Restoring Customer Faith, where we called it what it was. We realised we'd fundamentally lost the faith of our customers, and we named it, and we said, okay, we're going to devolve responsibility to a local level. We're going to empower local managers to take more decisions, and we're going to set them up as local CEOs, and that has delivered great benefits to us. The journey continued. In 2004, for example, we had a big emphasis on sustainability, introducing a whole range of financial literacy programs for our people. We decided financial literacy was a core skill that we had that we could help the community with. So to date, we've trained over 700 people to deliver financial literacy courses to people, and 15,000 people have attended those courses. We've got a Saver Plus program which helps lower income families to save money for their children's education, and we match their savings up to the tune of $2,000. So that's an initiative that over 700 families have availed of to date. With our own people, we've done things like guaranteed part-time employment for over 55s. So if you're over 55 in the ANZ, you have a right to work part-time, irrespective of whether your manager agrees or not. So that is your right. And we're starting to extend that right to other people now. Flexible working, if you look 7 to 8 years down the track, the estimates currently are that there will be 1 million unfilled positions in Australia. So the company that gets on top of this flexibility issue is going to win in the marketplace. Free health checks for all employees is another initiative that we launched in 2005. So every year, basically, we take a temperature check and we decide, okay, what are we going to do in terms of our key stakeholders this year? And you've got to keep the energy and momentum going, otherwise it just becomes a fad. So on the basis of this, we've created a very different work environment where essentially back in 1999 we had 50% staff satisfaction. So 1 in 2 people were saying they did not want to be working at ANZ, they were not satisfied working here. With the advent of this program, very quickly, by February 2004, our staff satisfaction rates had risen to 85%. So you can see how quickly, if you have a focused effort, how quickly you can get results. The other key thing to note is this was a project team that reported directly to the CEO. So it wasn't part of HR or people capital. Sometimes that in and of itself can get you it just gets caught up in politics. So we reported directly to John McFarlane. In February 2004, we decided we wanted a tougher measure because obviously we were reaching a ceiling in terms of staff satisfaction. And we saw that engagement was a more meaningful measure from our perspective and probably a more challenging measure. So we used the Hewitt Engagement Survey, which many of you would know, but it measures 3 aspects. The say aspect, so what do people say about the organisation? Are they saying positive things about the bank? Stay, which is, are people willing to stay with the organisation irrespective of offers and maybe even more attractive financial offers from elsewhere? And the third component is the strive component. So do people strive to give more of their discretionary effort to their roles, to their jobs every day? So those are the 3 aspects of engagement, a much tougher measure. But essentially, if you get into this high performance zone, then the data shows us that you expect, well, companies in that zone deliver over 20% total shareholder return year on year. So they're highly productive, and the correlation between high engagement and high productivity has been proven. So you can see ANZ there at 60%. We're just in that zone. We want to be at 70%, so we've set our intention to be at 70%. But in fact, we have delivered over the past 5 years over 20% total shareholder return to the market. So that we're the highest or the largest company with the highest engagement scores across Australia and New Zealand. So, and again, we want that to be at 70, so we're not satisfied with that. In terms of some of the discussion this morning about how does the market respond to this, you can see that over time, the intangible net assets per share, which is the green component of our share price. So this is our total share price. And a couple of days ago, we were at $26.86. In fact, yesterday we closed above $28, so it is fluctuating a bit. But a larger component of our share price is starting to be recognised as the intangible component. So if you look at the share price, this component, $8.53, can be represented by fixed assets. So that's the buildings we own, the money that we have in the bank, the actual stuff that you can say that's worth X amount of dollars. The rest of our share price in green represents things like culture, our reputation, our leadership, our strong brand, our growth opportunities, our talented people. So that's the intangible net asset value, and it is increasing over time. So the market is factoring that into our share price. So believe me, this stuff does matter. Now, I just want to show you a slide, which this is, somebody asked the question earlier on, what do your people think of your values? Now, this is a survey that we run every year, and we have done since 2000, and it's by a company called CTT, which is based in the States. A guy called Richard Barrett runs that company. And essentially, we ask our people every year, we give them a list of over 100 words, and those words represent values which are common across companies and also some that are unique to us. Some of those values are also limiting values or negative stuff that shows up in the organisation. So we are able to track our people's perception of our values over time. And in fact, in 2006, 27,000 of our people filled in this survey. So it's quite broad. So if you look at this chart, you can see that when we first started doing this back in 2000, our people were saying there's a lot of red here, and red is not good. So our top 3 values were cost reduction, profit, shareholder value. So quite a financially driven organisation. In there was also bureaucracy, hierarchy, short-term focus, long hours, and risk averse. So there was a lot of negative stuff going on in the organisation at that stage. Move to 2006, you can see that the red has almost disappeared out of the chart. So all of the potentially limiting values have disappeared, with the exception of risk averse, which some people would say is not a bad thing for a bank to be. And our top 3 values are profit, customer focus, and community involvement. So these are the things that our people are saying they are seeing. 27,000 people are seeing those as their top 3 values. So a much more balanced approach rather than just being financially driven. And just some of the corporate social responsibility index awards that we've received in terms of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which was mentioned earlier. We have been ranked in the top 5 banks globally on this, an overall gold medal, and rank 3 on the Australian Corporate Responsibility Index. So people are beginning to recognise that this approach, the inside-out approach to cultural transformation, does make an impact. It's not just about what you do with your customers, what you do with your community. It's a bit like charity begins at home. I think the way you treat your employees and the way you are internally actually impacts everything that you do externally. So that's basically a quick summary of what we're doing in the ANZ.
Thanks, Siobhan. Do you need any more persuading? That story speaks for itself. It's a huge journey that they've made, and thanks to Siobhan for painting the picture so clearly for us. We now move, so Siobhan, if you'd like to join us up here, we now move to OP3. This is OP is organisational psychologist. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yes. Frances Feenstra. Frances is the Director of Performance Improvement at PricewaterhouseCoopers, has previously worked in the public sector, for the Victorian Government, New South Wales and the Federal Government. She works with numerous clients in sectors such as manufacturing, resources and financial services. She has psychology qualifications, which I don't need to go any further. And she specialises in employee engagement and talent management. Now, I don't know if you've read the book Discover Your Strengths, which is around talent, skills and knowledge. And talent is the vital. You have to have talent. You don't bother with skill building if you haven't got the talent. And that's one of the focuses that we're going to hear from Frances today. So please welcome Frances Feenstra.
Thank you. Okay, can you all hear me at the back? I thought being P3 was better than P1 or 2 because it is too close to being B1 or B2. But and at least there's no B3 that you can be compared to. But now, having listened to these 2 presentations, I actually probably would have preferred to have been P1 because these are fairly significant footsteps to follow into. So I very much enjoyed that, and I was actually wondering if I'm allowed to ask questions from up there of the other speakers later on. Anyway, good morning. I'm Frances Feenstra from PricewaterhouseCoopers. My personality profile always tells me I'm not very detail conscious, and I noticed only this morning that I had not put anything like that on the first slide, but I'm sure that that is not going to bother you too much. Now, we've heard about some of the data that Peter Langford collected with the Voice project, and I voted wrongly on pretty much everything, and I then started voting on everything just to make sure that I didn't look like a total idiot. So maybe that sort of reduces my credibility a bit, but bear with me for a moment. And we've heard from Siobhan the importance of employee engagement. Now, what we actually have found at PwC is that it's not so much that people don't see the importance, companies don't see the importance of their people, but that they then don't link that to the other things that they are doing. And so I really want to tell you a story about the importance of linking data and the importance of that. So let me just quickly go back, and Siobhan covered some of this, or a lot of this, but I want to say, well, employee engagement, why is it important? Now, many of you, and maybe all of you, have seen this diagram before. It's a fairly seminal study, and it's a very, very good study that was done in the 90s and is probably ongoing, but this is the last publication of it, by Ruchi, Kim and Quinn, and it was about Sears Roebuck in the States. And just in short, what it showed was that if you make a place a compelling place to work, and I think we could all agree that, for instance, ANZ is a compelling place to work, because that's certainly what our staff tell us at PwC when they're looking to make a change across the Yarra. A compelling place to work leads to a compelling place to shop, and then a compelling place to invest. So it's all about, one thing leads to another, leads to your bottom line outcome. The fact is that this study was probably one of the first studies where that was actually done, and where it was shown that the employee attitude towards their job immediately impacts their behaviour, both in terms of turnover, so retention, will I stay or will I go, and also their service helpfulness. Now, service quality and service helpfulness is seen as a great differentiator by companies, so seems to be a fairly important variable. In fact, in this study, very clearly, and there's very good data to back this up, a 5-unit increase in employee attitude directly drives a 1.3 unit increase in customer impression, which then drives a 0.5% increase in revenue growth. And when people say, well, 0.5% increase in revenue growth is not very much, for Sears, actually, in 1998, that translated into $200 million. So that's probably worth having. And I would imagine that that's probably these days more. I would not like to think what that might be for ANZ. But so some other data, just very quickly. ISR, International Survey Research, another company, also looked at the same phenomena of the impact of engagement on outcome, and they found that operating margins and net profit margins are directly affected by how engaged your employees are, with the red bar there showing the engaged companies that they work with. And in a similar vein, Hewitt, and Siobhan mentioned the Hewitt company, their best employer research, they looked at the companies they worked with from 2000 to 2003, and again revenue growth for their best employers, so that was actually shown in that diagram before. Those who are at the 60 or above mark in terms of engagement do significantly better both in revenue growth and in terms of profit earnings growth. So you may have seen all this data before, but then the question that we ask ourselves is, if that is the case, and because we see a lot of, you can imagine, we talk to a lot of organisations at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and so if you have all this evidence out there, then why is not more being done? And in fact, there isn't nearly as much done as you think. Yeah, these days most organisations have an engagement survey, and everybody talks about their engagement score, but I still see very little done. And I must say, one of the things that struck me, Siobhan was standing here not very long ago saying, look, see the things that you can do in a very short period of time to get from there to there. Now, her concept of a short period of time and the concept of most of the people I deal with is different, because most of the clients we speak to say, look, we have a bit of a problem and it would be really good if you could fix it between now and the next annual general meeting. It isn't like, we have a problem, we know it starts at the top, we want to fix it, and we're happy to take, however, 4 or 5 years to get these fantastic results. No, that's not. It's still very much often about quick fixes that actually really don't exist. And that's why that presentation was really so great, because it really shows what you can do when you really set your mind to it, and when you have the long-term view, or at least a medium-term view. So in order then to make that more real, now think of my situation. I'm a psychologist, P3, as from today, but I actually live in a building of accountants. right? Now, no offence to accountants, if there's any in the room here, very, very nice people, by and large, but they like numbers, particularly financial numbers. And of course, every organisation has a number of accountants in it, at least one in the guise of the CFO. So if you come and you say, look, employee engagement is really important, they say, show me the money. And if you can't show them the money, people say, well, there's very good research out there. We find that at least, well, this is anecdotal, but certainly my experience would tell me at least 6, 7 out of 10 organisations say yes. But that research was those companies. That's different. I understand for them that worked. For our company, that's different. So what we're advocating is it would be really good if you could link the data that sits in your organisation that can show and quantify what the difference would be for your company. And personally, I don't care whether that is the same as it is for every other company, as long as you can make it real and relevant for the people in the organisation. So the model here shows you that what we're saying is employee engagement, and this is no different from what I showed you before with the Sears model. But employee engagement impact has a direct effect on your bottom line in terms of turnover, because and absenteeism, because as people turn over, they cost you money. Every time you bring on a new employee, that costs significant amounts of money. Every time your employee decides to take a day off when there's really nothing wrong with them, that costs an organisation money. And of course, that employee lower engagement levels also then have an effect directly on productivity. So there's that. But then there's also that link through your customers. So if an organisation's customers are directly impacted by the level of employee engagement, and that then directly impacts on your bottom line. So there are linking models that can be made in order to show what the effect is of your employees, or any organisation's employees, on their customer base, whoever those customers may be. Clearly, slightly. Oh, it's still. Oh, that's all right. It's probably thinking too many psychologists already. Time to move on. So it's good to have that sort of, to have that for your organisation, and to then, and this is a slightly more detailed picture of the same thing, to say, what's the employee perception? So, for instance, I'm provided with opportunities to develop both myself and my career. Might be a survey question, which then leads directly to, in your human capital metrics, career path ratios and your L&D investment per your full-time employees. That directly impacts on, for instance, new products, and new products has an impact on your customers, and that then impacts your revenue per customer. So I don't think I need to go into it in much more detail than that, but you get the picture. So we're definitely advocating that you need to do that for your organisation. I'll skip the next slide. So what needs to happen? Well, what we find, of course, is that in most organisations, HR or human capital sits over here. Marketing and or sales sits over there. And, the finance department sits over there. They're all holding on to large amounts of data, but very few people do any linking of that data. So HR says, oh, fantastic. We've got this, we've done this engagement survey. Okay, well, the engagement score may not be quite where it is, but it's given us a list of initiatives that we can now focus on. The list of initiatives, however, is not directly linked to what the customers are saying they want. So your sales and your marketing area now works on how can we have more customer engagement. And the finance guys and girls are saying what's happening to our bottom line, why we're not doing as well this year as we did last year. If you linked it all together in in a good, robust model that can do that for you, you can show what are the right initiatives. So we're saying align your HR, marketing and finance so you can focus on the right initiatives. And by the right initiatives, I'm not meaning that it's not valuable to invest in your employees. Of course it is. I mean, every initiative is from that perspective a right initiative, but there's finite money in every organisation to spend on employee initiatives. You may as well spend it on that employee initiatives that gives you biggest bang for your buck at the employee end and at the customer end at the same time. And that can be done. The other thing is evaluate the data you have and identify what you need, because the other thing that I've seen over many, many years is that there is far too much data that's not doing anything. People just collect so much data, some people just drowning in it. And because there's then a new question and people say, oh, we'll just go and get the answer to the question. The answer is most likely already sitting in the organisation. It's just a matter of finding, the data. And it may not sit in HR if you're in HR, it might sit in marketing. And then, of course, but there might be gaps. But it's worthwhile finding out what those gaps are before you go and do more surveying of your people and your customers. And determine what motivates your employees to deliver a superior customer experience and to do that consistently. And then quantify the impacts that employees and customers have on your organisation's results, because that is what will convince people to do the investment in the first place that you want. Now, this wasn't really going to be part of it, but I have a question, I suppose, for you. Because I've talked about this, and that outlook that was given away before, I wrote an article in that on the linking piece and why that is important, and I do believe it is important. But then when I think about corporate social responsibility, I sort of feel a little bit like I'm standing here saying, do employee engagement because it's good for your customer engagement, because it's good for your bottom line. And then the question in my head then says, but should you not care about corporate social responsibility even if it wasn't good for your bottom line? That's so I'm like, are you coming at it from one end or the other end? Are you saying, are we doing it because we believe in our employees? Or are we doing it because, we sort of believe in our employees, but we know that if we do it, we get better outcomes at the other end? That's quite a difficult question because, something inside me says, no, we should be doing it because we believe in the employee and it shouldn't matter what the outcome is. But of course, in business, it does matter. And when I hear people talking about corporate social responsibility and about the effect on your reputation, I think, so are you then doing it because it's good for the community, or are you doing it because it's good for your reputation? And anyway, again, that building full of accountants is sometimes quite useful. So, because it brings you back to the reality that Siobhan also touched on, that says, well, the bank is there to make a profit, end of story. I mean, it wouldn't be in business if it didn't. But you can go about that in different ways, I suppose. So I would just say that corporate social responsibility, while that might be very much on the mind of the people in this room, and you might all find it very important, I certainly think it's important. I don't believe that every person in business thinks it's important. And I don't think I'd get much argument with that in this room. But if you have good data around the actual benefits for the organisation from a financial perspective, you might actually get what you wanted anyway, but you're just coming at it from the other way. Now, and because everybody's used quotes, and I thought I didn't have one, the quote I'll finish with is actually one from my mother, and I suppose it fits here, because she raised us and always said, you catch more bees with honey than with vinegar, and I suppose this could be your honey to catch the bees that you want. Thank you.
Thanks, honey. person who's had to leave. Right. Well, that was a really good story from P1, P2 and P3. We heard about the power of the Voice Project. We heard about the power of the ANZ breakout with all its manifestations of breaking the business down into units, putting more people down the bottom line. I was reminded, actually, Siobhan, of Maverick, which you've probably read, Ricardo Semler. Everybody who hasn't read Maverick, I mean, he changed the world 20 years ago in South America, and did a whole lot of stuff around people and empowered them with decision making about how much they earned as well as what they did. And that's that kind of story. And then we heard this kind of overarching idea from Francis around the employee and the nexus between HR, and HR is often over there and needs to be integrated, and that it's a management imperative. Any accountants in the room? I was just reminded. Any accountants in the room? Fantastic. Well, you know, we've got 2 accountants today, and we got any lawyers today? Yeah, we have lawyers today, and we have psychologists. What a richness of tapestry we have here. Now we're going to move into about a 10-15 minute panel discussion. I would ask Rosemary to step up to the stage, and would you keep your question brief? This is question time, not statement time. So I'd ask you to stand up, say who you are, take the microphone and ask the question briefly, and then the panel will decide who's going to answer it. And I'd suggest brevity would be the power in the answer and in the reception of it. So with that, over to you guys in the panel.
Ron Kruger, ABL State Chamber. A question for Siobhan. We spoke last week. In embarking on your journey, did you use the services or employ the services of a coach? And if so, for how long?
Sorry, was that did I?
Or did the organisation?
Did the organisation? Good question. We actually partnered with an organisation called McKinsey, who many of you would know in the initial phases. So they were very useful in terms of helping us gather the data, just the data to provide the burning platform. Many of our senior executives have personal coaches. That's just one of the ways we give people feedback constantly, and they are encouraged to have a coach. But it's not a remedial thing. It's not you've got a coach because there's something wrong with you. It's you're good. How can you get the edge?
Jetta Fanning, Monash University, but my area of expertise is marketing. So I'm interested, Siobhan, will there be a stage where you will incorporate your breakout with your ANZ brand advertising so the general consumer is aware of what you're doing? And do you feel that's important or maybe not?
It's a very good question, and I think in light of Westpac's recent move into that area, we have been looking at that, but up to now we've been very consciously not doing that because we wanted to make sure our intention was pure around that. So it was we do it because it's the right thing to do, not because it can give us reputation explicitly in the marketplace. But I think if you do it, you have to be very careful about the tone and why you're doing it. And to date, we haven't done that. We'd rather show, not tell. So allow it just to be, trickle out in its own natural way, rather than sort of broadcast it.
David Truan, Department of Environment here in New South Wales. Another question for Siobhan. How important is breakout? How important is the perspective of the CEO and his leadership role? And if he was to leave, would breakout fare necessarily as successfully?
Yeah, good question. I think Breakout is definitely John's initiative. He is the sponsor. It would not be in place without John. However, after such a lengthy period, it's now become part of the DNA of the organisation, and a lot more people are stewards of the culture.
And I think the board would probably be looking for somebody either internally or externally who would be able to carry that forth in a way that had continuity, but obviously a new CEO will put his or her own brand on that, so I'm sure it will morph into something that is similar in some ways but very different.
This is a question for P1. Megan Utter from DLA Phillips Fox. I'm still intrigued by what I consider to be a counterintuitive result in your survey, that work-life balance, peace as you termed it, doesn't contribute to passion and engagement in the workplace. I was wondering if you could explain that a bit further.
Yeah, look, I guess you're saying, why is that the case, or why is it so different to what the media is pushing? One thing that we have done in follow-up to the results that we've had from that, and as I said, that surprised us. A couple of our master's students at Macquarie University tried to break down work-life balance into various components and look at what's the most important part of it. And clearly, across two separate studies, two separate samples of people, it was flexibility was the single most important part of work-life balance. It wasn't hours that people were working. They don't seem to mind what hours they work. They don't necessarily mind shifts and stuff like that in general, but it was the flexibility that came up as most important. So being able to control when you work. People don't mind busting a guts and putting in lots of hours if perhaps they can leave at 3 o'clock if they need to pick up the kids or do some banking. But then they're willing to work late at night, or they're willing to work on the weekends. So I'd say flexibility is an important component to it. But then, even when we did that, it still wasn't as important as a lot of other quite basic management practices. And I think that's where work-life balance has perhaps taken a life of its own, in that we see it as important. Yes, there's a link, but there are other more important things. There are other more important reasons why people come and work at a law firm or a consulting firm or a manufacturer of some sorts. And it does come down to this sense of, why is this organisation here? What is it doing? The purpose. This sense of, I'm involved, I'm recognised in this place, and is the place successful? And those things come up as bigger drivers than a lot of those aspects of work-life balance.
I just wonder if there's not generational differences in what's perceived as work-life balance.
We can hog the stage up here and we'll just keep on asking each other questions. The fascinating thing about the generational differences, in terms of perceptions of work-life balance, I couldn't answer that. But we have broken that model down across generational differences. And if you go by all the hype in the media, it's that the younger folks want work-life balance, and that is not what we found. What we found, in fact, and it's not rocket science, is the middle-aged folks who are married, who have kids, who want work-life balance more than the young folks. The young folks actually want it least. They're willing to put in the hours, they're willing to do travel, they're willing to sacrifice family and social. They're in there, they're excited about the job. So I think that's another fascinating finding that we've had that goes against what a lot of the media is covering these days for generational differences.
Peter, can I just follow on from that, please? Gillian Rivers. And I was actually curious that you'd left the question of creativity and innovation out of that category of passion and engagement. I thought that was quite significant, especially when you followed up on the other speakers, the link in there between those two factors and the question of value, autonomy, utilising talent, to me seems to be the primary issue to do with engagement, and yet the words that you were using didn't indicate that. Can I please ask why that element was not included?
Why was innovation or autonomy missing from
innovation and creativity, yes, and staff being able to actually utilise their talents.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it comes down to how you define things. And employee engagement is this concept out there that is defined in many, many different ways. We've dragged it back, within Voice Project, we've dragged it back to issues that have been heavily studied. Employee engagement actually hasn't been studied. You look at the academic literature, the scientific literature, and there's not much out there. So we've dragged it back to things that have been studied. Basically, commitment to the organisation, that is, I feel, is emotional commitment to the goals and the place. I enjoy my day-to-day job, and I'm intending to keep working here. So I guess part of it's a definitional issue. That's what we've gone back to. That's what the stats say seem to hang together. But don't lose sight of, I guess, the other drivers that came up of engagement. And one of those things was the progress box, which had change and innovation in there. And people are quite passionate in organisations that manage change and innovation well. So innovation is strongly linked to it. It's not the same thing in terms of how we've defined it, but there's a strong relationship between it. And also that participation box came up as important. And in that is the sense of involvement, of being taking part in decision making in the organisation. So in that sense, I think some of that perhaps autonomy and involvement is coming through as well. So I'd say it's definitely linked. We just haven't defined it. In some ways, the stats haven't shown that it's exactly the same thing, but one causes the other.
Right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any more questions, please feel free. I think you'll be around at lunchtime. So please feel free to get hold of them at lunchtime. So P1 to P2, P3, P4, now, or previous. Please thank them for their wonderful presentations.